All right, guys, today we're talking about shadow boxing, one of the most underused tools that we have in striking. And the reason why I believe that it's underused is because I think people are not getting the benefits of it. So I'm gonna do a class today about how to maximize the benefits you get from shadow boxing, where you can see improvements in a matter of weeks. So let's go ahead and get into it. The first thing that we want to look for or make sure that we have squared away is our stance in shadow boxing. I always tell people that your stance should be your neutral. It should drain zero gas from your tank. It should be relaxed. So making sure that your stance is relaxed is going to be the first step. So let's get started. We want our feet shoulder width apart. I'm going to use my southpaw stance, but if you're orthodox, you just put that right foot back as opposed to the left foot, bringing that foot back. We're looking for stability going front to back and side to side. We're going to take that shoulder, that front shoulder, and slightly bring it forward. And then we're going to bend the arms right at the elbows. Bring that chin down. I always tell people, instead of bringing your hands up to your chin, bring your chin into your guard. So this is what your stance should look like when you're shadow boxing or when you're sparring. This is what your stance should look like. Now, a couple things I'm going to point out that are going to highly benefit you when you're talking about shadow boxing. The first thing is our footwork. Assuming that everybody knows their footwork, we all know that whichever foot is in the direction that we're going, that's the foot that moves first. So, if we're moving forward, the front foot moves first, the back foot follows. If we're moving back, the back foot and the front foot, left, right. So when we're moving around in shadow boxing, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are moving on the balls of our feet. The next thing that we want to make sure when we're moving around is to make those steps small. Remember, when we are sparring, when we have somebody in front of us and we're punching and kicking, it's a game of inches. The difference between being in range and out of range is one small step. We don't want to be dashing and darting across the mat, because the further we get away from our opponent, the further we got to come back to him to come get him. So we want to make those steps small. The angles that we need to make are going to be slight. And we want to keep ourselves, we want to play in the in range, out of range space. We don't want to be far out of range. We want to be slightly out of range so we can get in range and land our punches and land our kicks. So, step small, moving on the balls of our feet, moving often. I tell people all the time that you don't get too much opportunity to get fluid with your footwork from sparring, from working on the bags, from doing pad and mid work. When you're working on the bags, your movement is limited. When you're doing pad and mid work, your movement is kind of limited to whoever's holding pads. When you're sparring, your movement is limited to whatever your opponent, whatever your sparring partner is doing. So shadow boxing is a great opportunity to really work your footwork. And I tell people all the time, you want to over-exaggerate the amount of movement that you're doing when you're shadow boxing. Over-exaggerate. Now, next thing that we want to make sure that we're doing is we want to when we're throwing our punches, we want to make sure that we're getting full extension on those punches. A big mistake that a lot of people make is that because they're not hitting an inanimate object that's holding up their weight, when they're shadow boxing, they're throwing those punches kind of halfway out there. Huge mistake. Shadow boxing is also the perfect opportunity to train yourself how to miss. What does that mean? That means that we all know that at the highest level, professional strikers, boxers, kickboxers are only landing at best 40% of the time. So most of the punches are going to miss. When we extend those punches out and we punch with as full of force that we can, what we're training ourselves to do is to miss without our balance getting thrown off, still having the ability to flow to the next thing, and being able to hold our own weight without having a big object. Basically, we don't want our power, our extension of our punch to be dependent on there being a target, because that target is going to move. If I'm not used to throwing my punch all the way out there and bringing it back, and I'm used to a heavy bag carrying that weight, when that heavy bag isn't there, or when I miss, I'm going to throw myself off balance. But shadow boxing, if we use it correctly, we can train ourselves to be able to flow from punch to kick to punch, and actually throw those strikes with the intention of hitting our opponent or hitting the target, but the intensity of the punch, we can make it so that it's not dependent on us actually hitting something. So we want to make sure that we're moving often. Again, you don't get the opportunity to move, over-exaggerate. We want to make sure that we are extending our punches fully, going through full range of motion, and training ourselves that we don't lose balance when we don't hit anything. Now, the last thing I'm going to go over is that you have to remember what we are trying to do when we're shadow boxing is we're trying to merge two polar opposites, one being stability and one being mobility. Those two things don't mix, but the better we are able to mix those two things, the more proficient and the more effective we're going to be on our feet. So how do we do that in shadow boxing? What we need to do, like I said, we're moving often. That's facilitating the mobility part. But for the split second that you are throwing your strikes, you have to make sure that those feet are planted into the ground. Now, initially, when you're starting off, you have to be mindful of that. Meaning, you might need to move around slow. Every time you throw a punch, stability, back to mobility. Stability, back to mobility. Stability, back to mobility. That's how you want to do it. What happens is that without being deliberate about that process, we rush the punches out before our feet are on the ground. You have people throwing across without the back foot being on the ground. And we don't want that. So, 3 things. We want to make sure that our stance is nice and relaxed. We want to make sure that we're moving a lot. And we want to make sure that we are fully extending those punches. And then we also want to make sure that when we're throwing those punches and throwing those kicks, well, with the kicks, we want to make sure we get our feet back down to the mat. But when we're throwing those punches, we want to make sure that our feet are making contact with the mat every time for that split second that those punches are going out. All right, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed. Coach Sully, Reps and Sweat Martial Arts and Fitness. Let's get it.